Hueso Seco. The package wasn't mailed. It was left. Mateo Cruz Aguilar found it on the doorstep of his sterile Mexico City apartment, a simple cardboard box sealed with brown tape. It had been left some time in the last hour. He knew this because the object inside was still warm. He pulled it out with a hand that was rock steady, a surgeon's hand, a veladora negra, a tall black votive candle, the kind sold in every botanica from Chiapas to Tijuana, encased in glass. At the bottom of the box, beneath the cheap wax, was a singed, laminated rectangle. Valeria's press pass. His breath hitched. Just once. It was the only sign of weakness he'd allow. Mateo Aguilar, late of the Grupo de Operaciones Especiales, de GOPES, was a man built from hard angles and cold logic. He was a master of the unseen war, the man who could dismantle a human mind in an interrogation room with nothing but cadence and carefully chosen words. He hadn't fired his service weapon in 3 years, but he had broken 36 men. He'd left the GOPs after Acapulco, after his wife, Elena, had been caught in the crossfire of a cartel ambush. He'd held her on the sidewalk as she bled out, her last sight the leering painted calavera masks of the sicarios who had done it. They had all worn Santa Muerte charms, crude bone amulets clacking on their chests as they fired. For Mateo, faith wasn't a comfort. It was a psychosis with a body count. It was the solvent that dissolved reason, leaving only monsters. And now, Valeria, his sister, the only family he had left. The idealistic journalist, always chasing the story that would make a difference. Her last voicemail had been thin, crackling with bad reception. I'm close to something, Mateo. Something big in Sonora. They're not just missing. They're being taken for a reason. It's tied to La Huesuda. I'm going to Hueso Seco. Hueso Seco. Dry bone. A forgotten stain on the map, a graveyard of NAFTA promises, and sun-bleached dog skulls. Now, it was the sovereign territory of La Huesuda, the Bony Lady, the cartel and the folk saint, inextricably linked. He held the warm candle. A message. We have her. We see you. He picked up the press pass. The edges were bubbled and black, but the center was clear. Her face, smiling, full of a light he hadn't possessed in a decade. Mateo Aguilar packed a duffel bag. One pistol, a CZP-9, broken down, 3 extra magazines, a compact med kit, a tactical knife, and a small, powerful audio recorder. He was not going to war as a soldier. He was going as a scalpel. He was going to cut the faith out of Hueso Seco, starting with the heart. The bus wheezed to a stop, kicking up a plume of alkali dust that tasted like pulverized bones. Hueso Seco wasn't a town. It was a scar. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating trilogy of smells. Cheap candle wax, rotting garbage, and the sweet resinous tang of copal incense. Shrines were everywhere, not hidden in homes, but public, aggressive. Every street corner had a crude cinder block niche holding a statue of the Bony Lady. Some were draped in pesos, others in jewelry. One, outside a shuttered farmacia, was surrounded by bottles of tequila and piles of cigarettes. Offerings. The people moved with a hushed, shuffling gait, eyes down. They were a congregation of the damned, and the air crackled with a fear that was more than just fear of the gun. It was religious terror. Mateo moved through it, a ghost of gray concrete in a world of brown dust. His Gopez training kicked in. He was a chameleon, his posture slumping, his gaze becoming vacant. He was just another broken man looking for a cheap beer. He saw them before they saw him. 2 sicarios posted outside a taqueria. They wore the uniform, cowboy boots. designer jeans, and gaudy Santa Muerte medallions that hung to their sternums. They weren't just guards, they were acolytes. Their eyes were too bright, their smiles too fixed. Mateo needed a baseline. He needed to know the enemy. He walked past them, accidentally jostling the larger one. "Watch it, pendejo," the man hissed, shoving Mateo against the adobe wall. The man's breath was a foul mix of tequila and meth. Mateo held his hands up, palms out. "My apologies, Jefe. I didn't see you." The second man, younger, with a fresh facial tattoo of a rosary, stepped in. "He doesn't see, but La Jefa sees all. She sees your disrespect." "I meant nothing," Mateo said, keeping his voice flat, submissive. "She is a jealous mother," the big one said, his hand moving to the pistol in his belt. He smiled, a grotesque pulling of lips. "And she demands respect. Maybe you should make an offering. Your boots, perhaps." "Please," Mateo said. "I have nothing." The big one's eyes lit up. This was the script, the part he enjoyed. He grabbed Mateo's shirt. "Everyone has something to offer the skinny lady." Mateo's hands moved in a blur. One hand grabbed the Sicario's wrist, the other chopping down on the brachial artery of his outstretched arm. The man's arm went numb, his pistol grip fingers splaying open. Mateo didn't stop. He pivoted, using the man's momentum to spin him around, his arm now wrenched behind his back in a hyperextended joint lock. The Sicario screamed as his shoulder tore. The young one fumbled for his own gun. Mateo, still holding the first man as a shield, drove a vicious sidekick into the kid's knee. The joint inverted with a wet, popping sound. The kid went down, howling. Mateo slammed the big man's face into the adobe wall. He didn't knock him out. He held him, the man's breath fogging the dusty wall, the medallion of Santa Muerte swinging wildly, clacking against his teeth. "Who runs this town?" Mateo's voice was a low cobra rasp, the interrogation voice. "Go to hell," the man spat, along with a bloody tooth. Mateo applied pressure to the joint lock. The man shrieked. She protects us! El Centinela, he will gut you for this! La Hiusuda will claim your soul! El Centinela," Mateo repeated. "The Watchman. Valeria's notes had mentioned the name. The High Priest. The Boss. Where does he keep his kennel?" "Fuck you. The Saint will strike you down." Mateo had what he needed. He wasn't here to fight the foot soldiers. He dislocated the man's shoulder with a final, brutal twist and dropped him. He kicked the kid's pistol into the gutter. He walked away. The entire street had seen it. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, their faces blank, as if watching a ghost walk through a wall. He had broken the spell, if only for a moment, but the fear that replaced it was just as deep. He needed a sanctuary, a place without a skeleton. He found it on the edge of the Zocalo, a small, crumbling Catholic church, its bell tower silent, its wooden doors bleached gray by the sun. Dust coated the pews. The crucifix behind the altar was missing an arm. It smelled of mildew and bird droppings. An old man in a threadbare cassock was sweeping the empty nave. He looked up, his eyes watery and defeated. "Can I help you, my son?" "Father Felix?" The priest nodded, leaning on his broom. "There are not many who seek me out. Most prefer the new church." His hand gestured vaguely toward the town, toward the ubiquitous shrines. "I'm looking for my sister," Mateo said, cutting to the chase. "Valeria Aguilar, a journalist." The priest's face, already a roadmap of sorrow, seemed to collapse further. He crossed himself. Valeria. Yes, a brave girl. Too brave. She came to me, asked questions. I told her to leave this place. Where is she, Father? The devil has this town, son, Felix whispered, looking around the empty church as if the shadows had ears. El Centinela. He is a monster. I'm not afraid of monsters, Mateo said. I'm looking for a person. Do you know where she is? Felix shook his head. She was asking about the desaparecidos. The disappeared. But they are not just disappeared. They are claimed. El Centinela. He holds a service every night. He calls it a cleansing. He says the saint whispers the names of the unfaithful to him, the names of outsiders. And when she whispers, the priest shuddered. Valeria was an outsider. You said he's a monster, Mateo said, his eyes locking on the priest. But you think he's a prophet? No, Felix said, too quickly. He is a charlatan, a blasphemer. But his power is real, the people believe. He performs miracles. Miracles, Mateo scoffed. Show me. He knew when the Federales' truck would break down. He prophesied it. He knew which shipment of narco-trafficantes was a trap. He calls fire from the altars. Inside information. Small explosives, Mateo said, the mechanics of it clicking into place instantly. PSYOPs 101. He's a con man. A con man who controls 1,000 guns, Felix countered. A con man who sacrificed his own brother on the public altar, claiming the saint demanded it. The people are not his prisoners, mijo. They are his congregation. You cannot fight that. I can, Mateo said. I need a place to stay, somewhere I can watch. Somewhere safe. Father Felix hesitated, his eyes darting to the broken crucifix. There is an old room above the sacristy. It is humble, but it is consecrated ground. His evil will not enter here. I'm not worried about his evil, Mateo said, shouldering his bag. I'm worried about his eyes. The room was a cot and a bucket. It was perfect. It overlooked a narrow alley that fed into the main square. From his window, Mateo could watch the lifeblood of Hueso Seco. He spent 2 days. He watched. He listened. He saw the miracles. A sicario who had skimmed from a shipment was brought before a public shrine. El Centinela, a tall, charismatic man with a voice like a radio preacher, didn't touch him. He simply raised his hands and prayed. As he did, the veladora in front of the man exploded, spraying his face with hot wax and glass. The man screamed, clutching his eyes, convinced Santa Muerte herself had blinded him. Mateo, watching through binoculars, had smelled the faint whiff of acetone. He'd seen the small, wire-thin filament running from the candle to a battery pack hidden by a loyal acolyte in the crowd. He saw a woman, weeping, approach El Centinela, begging for a cure for her sick child. El Centinela placed his hand on her head and declared the saint would show a sign. That night, the jefe of the neighboring plaza, a rival, was found dead in his car, a holy bullet in his head. The woman's child coincidentally was given antibiotics stolen from a government truck. A miracle. It was brilliant, brutal, a closed information loop. El Centinela used fear to maintain control, and his control gave him access to all information. He knew who was cheating, who was sick, who was dissenting. His prophecies were just well-informed threats. He was a god because he was the only one who read the town's mail. Mateo had his psychological profile. Now he needed a location. He turned his attention to Father Felix. The priest brought him stale bread and water, his hands shaking. He seemed a broken, terrified, good man. And Matteo's training screamed that he was a liar. On the third night, Matteo didn't eat the bread. He attached a microtransmitter, a button, to the underside of the priest's wooden tray. When Felix left, Matteo followed the signal. He didn't go far. The priest walked to the back of his own church, to the confessional. Matteo, moving silently through the shadows, slipped into the opposite booth. He put in an earpiece. He heard the partition slide open. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," a rough voice whispered. "What is it, my son?" Felix's voice was trembling. "El Centinela is pleased. The offering you made, the periodista, she was a valuable gift to the saint. The air in Matteo's lungs turned to ice. She was a child," Felix stammered. I only told you she was asking questions. I did it to protect my flock." "You promised you would leave my people alone." "And the watchman keeps his word," the Sicario said. "He protects those who serve. He purifies those who don't. Your flock is safe, as long as you remain a good shepherd. You've heard the rumors. A new man is in town. The one who broke Raoul's knee." A long silence. Matteo could hear the priest's ragged breathing. He is here," Felix whispered, the words tearing Matteo's world apart. "He is in the sacristy. He says he is her brother." The partition slammed shut. Matteo didn't move. "The betrayal was so cold, so complete, it was almost elegant. Felix wasn't a good man. He was a desperate one. He hadn't made a deal with the devil for money. He'd made it for a few scraps of false peace. He had fed Valeria to the wolf to keep the wolf from his own door. The Sicario left the church." Matteo remained in the dark, his hatred a solid, heavy thing in his chest. He'd come to fight a cult. He found a conspiracy. He heard the church door open again. Heavy boots. More than one. "He's in the sacristy." He heard Felix's voice, now high and panicked. "Take him. Just be quick. In the name of God." Matteo slipped out of the confessional and into the nave. 4 Sicarios, guns raised, were moving toward the back room. "Wrong room, boys," Matteo said from the darkness. They spun, firing wildly. Their bullets tore through the dusty pews, sending wooden splinters flying. Matteo was already moving, using the pillars as cover. A ghost in their own house of worship. He took the first one from behind, the K-bar sliding cleanly between the ribs. He used the man's falling body as a shield for the second man's volley. His pistol was out. Thwack, thwack. 2 rounds center mass. The man fell. The third one saw him, raised his rifle. Matteo shot the chain of the heavy iron chandelier above him. The chain snapped. The massive rusty fixture crashed down, crushing the Sicario beneath it. The fourth one, the one from the confessional, threw down his gun. "No, por favor. She protects me." He held his Santa Muerte amulet out like a shield. Matteo walked toward him, his face a mask of cold fury. "Does she?" he hissed. He grabbed the amulet, ripped it from the man's neck, and shoved it into his mouth. "Swallow it!" The man gagged, eyes wide with terror. "Where is my sister?" Matteo pressed the muzzle of his pistol under the man's chin. La Capilla Mayor," the man blubbered. "The old Maquiladora! El Centinela! He's giving her to the saint! Tonight! A blessing! For the new shipment!" "When?" "Midnight! At the chiming of the bell!" Matteo looked at the clock. 11:40 p.m. He knocked the man unconscious with the butt of his pistol. He turned to the altar. Father Felix was huddled behind it, weeping, clutching his broken crucifix. "You," Matteo said, his voice void of all emotion. "You are the worst of them all. You're not a monster. You're just a coward." He didn't kill the priest. He left him there, in his empty, desecrated church, to be discovered by whatever came next. Mateo Aguilar had a new church to visit. La Capilla Mayor was an old textile factory on the edge of town, its corrugated tin walls a canvas for sprawling, elaborate murals of the bony lady. The stench of copal, meth, and unwashed bodies rolled off it in waves. This wasn't a church. It was a hive. Music pounded from within a bizarre, hypnotic mix of narco-corridos and Gregorian chants. Mateo scaled the chain-link fence, cut through a rusted panel in the wall, and slipped inside. The heat was suffocating. The factory was packed with hundreds of followers, their faces slick with sweat and ecstatic fervor. They swayed and chanted, a sea of lost souls. The air was blue with smoke, and the altar was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. At the far end of the warehouse, where the loading bays should have been, stood a 20-foot-tall statue of Santa Muerte. It wasn't plaster. It was made of bone. Thousands of bones, animal and, he feared, human wired together, draped in silk, and adorned with jewels, blinking LEDs and gold chains. In one hand, she held her scythe. In the other, the globe. Her eyes were two massive, glittering rubies, and tied to her feet, dressed in a simple white shift, was Valeria. She was alive, but barely, drugged. Her head lolled. On a raised platform, like a high-tech pope, stood El Centinela. He wore white silk, his chest bare, covered in tattoos of the saint. He held a microphone. "She has given us everything," he boomed, his voice echoing from speakers hidden around the room. "She gave us this town. She blinded the federales. She delivered our enemies to us. And tonight, she gives us the mundo." His men, dozens of them, armed with AR-15 seconds, began wheeling out pallets stacked high with bricks of cocaine and shrink-wrapped bricks of cash. They placed them at the statue's feet. An offering. "She asks for one more gift," El Centinela roared. "She has protected our shipment. Now we must bless it. She is hungry. She demands the blood of the unbeliever, the traitor, the one who came to spy on our holy family." He pointed a long theatrical finger at Valeria. "She demands a soul," the crowd roared. "Huesos! Huesos! Sangre! Bones! Bones! Blood!" A Sicario handed El Centinela a long, obsidian-bladed knife. He raised it high. "We give her what she asks." Mateo moved. He didn't go for the guards. He didn't go for the stage. He went for the sound system. He climbed into the rafters, a shadow among the steel beams. He found the central junction box. He bypassed the amp, plugged in his audio recorder, and hit play. The sound that erupted from the speakers wasn't music. It was the terrified, blubbering confession of the Sicario from the church, pitched up, distorted, looped. El Centinela. He's giving her to the saint. Tonight! For the new shipment. The crowd faltered. The chanting stopped. "For the new shipment! For the new shipment!" El Centinela froze, his knife in the air. He looked around, confused. "What is this? Treachery!" Mateo didn't give him time to recover. From the rafters he fired 2 shots. Not at El Centinela, not at the guards. Ping! Ping! The statue's 2 massive ruby eyes exploded in a shower of red glass. The crowd gasped as one, a collective, horrified intake of breath. He shot her! Someone screamed. He blinded the saint! Panic. The most potent acid. It began to dissolve the fanaticism instantly. Seize him! El Centinela shrieked, his voice no longer a resonant boom, but a reedy, desperate cry. She will protect you! She is a god! You are invincible in her house! 3 sicarios near the stage, high on their own supply and their leader's words, opened fire into the rafters. They believed it. They believed they were invincible. Matteo, dropping back to the floor, proved them. Wrong. 3 shots. 3 dead fanatics. Their holy invincibility was no match for 9mm hollow points. The crowd began to scream. The spell was broken. Matteo sprinted for the stage. Guards turned, but they were now protecting El Centinela, not the goddess. Their faith had transferred back to the man, and the man was now just a gangster. A bullet grazed Matteo's arm. He felt the fire, ignored it. He vaulted the stage, tackling a guard. He used the man's rifle to spray a suppressing fire, not at people, but at the offerings. Bricks of cocaine exploded in clouds of white powder. Stacks of cash ignited. No! El Centinela screamed, his eyes wide with a different kind of religious horror. He wasn't looking at the defiled statue. He was looking at his money. Matteo grabbed a jerry can of gasoline, clearly meant for a generator, and doused the pallets. The fire roared to life. A 20-foot-high bonfire of cash and cocaine. The real God was burning. The crowd saw it. Their blessing, their miracle, their prophet. It was turning to smoke. The illusion shattered completely. They weren't a congregation. They were a mob, and their leader had just been exposed as a fraud. They surged, not to attack Matteo, but to grab the burning money. To save the burning drugs. The cult of Santa Muerte dissolved in seconds, replaced by the older, more powerful cult of greed. You, El Centinela stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. He had believed his own lie, and the lie had just caught fire. You have done nothing. I am her prophet. He lunged at Matteo with the obsidian knife. Matteo didn't reach for his gun. He met the lunge with a cold, GOPS-trained block, shattering the man's wrist. The knife clattered. Matteo drove his fist into the prophet's throat. El Centinela collapsed, choking, his holy voice reduced to a wet gurgle. He was just a man, a con man in a burning warehouse. Matteo sliced the ropes, holding Valeria. He threw her over his shoulder. She was light, too light. Let's go, Hermanita, he muttered. He didn't look back at El Centinela. He left him to his followers, who were now fighting each other for the scraps. Matteo fought his way through the chaos, a tactical island in a sea of greed. He burst out the side door into the cool desert night, the roar of the fire and the screams of a disillusioned cult at his back. He found an abandoned truck, hot-wired it in under 30 seconds, and threw Valeria into the passenger seat. He floored the accelerator, driving without headlights, barreling down the dirt track away from Hueso Seco. He didn't stop until the sun began to break over the distant Sierra Madre. The sky was a pale, bruised purple. In the rearview mirror, a pillar of thick black smoke rose from the town. Valeria stirred, coughing. Her eyes fluttered open. Matteo? She croaked. What happened? Matteo looked at the column of smoke. He looked at his sister, alive. He'd come to Hueso Seco to fight a demon. He hadn't killed an idea. He hadn't stamped out a faith. He just balanced the budget. I just vatchtron motke luadao, he said, his voice raw. I just exposed a fraud. He pressed a canteen of water to her lips. As she drank, he checked his own wounds. The bullet had torn a groove in his forearm. It would scar. He welcomed it. He put the truck in gear and pointed it toward the rising sun, leaving the ashes of a false god to be picked over by the desperate. The bony lady hadn't been in that warehouse, but a monster had. And Matteo had put him out of business.